Welcome back to The Deeper Pulse and another episode in the Culture series. I want to offer another quick shout out to patrons of The Deeper Pulse, whose monthly contributions are keeping the main feed of this podcast alive. This work continues to expand, and there are now a variety of bonus episode collections that are available over on Patreon. Resources for anti-cult education, 50-plus episodes of Deconstructing Dogma, and Subject to Change, a series of unscripted videos where I'm coming to you solo, responding to listener questions, sharing personal stories, and talking about whatever I'm feeling moved by in the moment. You can check it all out over at patreon.com/The Deeper Pulse. Okay, let's dive into today's content. Please be advised, today's episode makes reference to spiritual and religious abuse. And as always, the stories and opinions shared here are based on personal experience and are not intended to malign any individual, group, or organization. Welcome back, y'all. Today we're jumping right in. Spiritual and religious abuse. It doesn't get nearly enough airtime. And I can say from firsthand experience, harm is still harm, even when it's all zhuzhed up in love and light. And when we talk about the harm that happens in religious and spiritual communities, for some folks, the word abuse feels way too heavy-handed. And I just want to say, if that's true for you, it's a topic I really dive into way back in episode 59. So if you're getting hung up on that word, I really encourage you to circle back. But don't go yet. Stick around, because today's episode features another very important conversation that you won't want to miss. When we speak about spiritual and religious abuse, soft power coercion is very often at work. And here are a few ways that the subtleties of persuasion can show up in spiritual and religious communities. First, the misuse of scripture, dogma, or spiritualese to manipulate and/or exploit for the sake of personal gain or in collective sacrifice to an idealistic cause. Also, reverential treatment of leaders, be they self-anointed or chosen, whose purity is reflexively assumed, to whom superhuman authority is granted, and for whom relational accountability is virtually non-existent. Another red flag: excessive encouragement to regularly pay money and/or to donate labor, time, and life force energy to a cause wherein the goalpost is continually shifting and only a few folks at the top are profiting off of the freely given efforts of the many. And let's add one more to the list: pressure to conform to a code of conduct that largely limits personal agency and self-expression, often through the use of a shared language, thought-terminating cliches, and a culture that socially reinforces silence, secrecy, and obedience. And all of this resulting in feelings of isolation from self and the outside world, cognitive dissonance and dissociation when confronted with evidence that contradicts group theology, and understandable feelings of terror at the thought of leaving behind a community, a sense of belonging, and a spiritual, religious, or political identity. Trauma can be a slow burn experience, and abuse can show up in our so-called safe spaces when we least expect it. January is Spiritual Abuse Awareness Month, and today's episode is dedicated to anyone who has experienced a spiritual wound. What is a spiritual wound? It's the moral injury that results when the love we receive is loaded, when our trust and devotion to the good is somehow leveraged and used against us, when what brings our life a sense of meaning and purpose is misused to control, exploit, or overpower. And it's a spiritual wound because it disconnects us from our sense of self and our place in the world. There's a resulting feeling of chronic self-doubt and an ongoing sense that our very humanness, our reflexive way of being, is somehow leading us astray. Now, when we talk about cult dynamics, most of the time we think about it in terms of being in and getting out. Because of what Dr. Yanya Lalich refers to as bounded choice, separating from a high-demand individual or communities, well, it ain't easy. Again, cognitive dissonance, all that we've invested, and an all-in sense of belonging that's pretty hard to find elsewhere. Exiting can be arduous, painful, and difficult. I ought to know I have plenty of firsthand experience, and it is, as they say, a BFD. But it's also just the first step on the road of cult recovery. And this week's guest is here to help us understand all of this a bit better. Nikki G is a certified trauma recovery coach who helps survivors recover and thrive after religious trauma and cult involvement. She is the survivor of more than one narcissistic relationship, religious trauma, and multiple cultic communities. Nikki is the founder and CEO of Nikki G Speaks LLC, which provides survivors with individual coaching, online community, and psychoeducation related to religious trauma, narcissistic abuse, and cult involvement. Nikki is a co-host of the podcast Surviving the Black Church, where she and her co-hosts delve into conversations regarding religious trauma in the Black Church. She is the co-founder of the Black Religious Trauma Recovery Network, which is a resource built to educate, support, and empower Black religious trauma survivors. Nikki also sits on the board of directors for Tears of Eden, a nonprofit organization that supports survivors who have experienced abuse in the evangelical community. She is also a member of the International Association of Trauma Recovery Coaching and is a member of International Cultic Studies Association, where she keeps abreast of the latest information regarding spiritual abuse, cults, and how trauma and abuse affects survivors. I first discovered Nikki's work back in March of last year when I tuned in to the Surviving the Black Church podcast that she co-hosts with her colleagues Jonathan Carrington and Hugh Kelly. Midway into the first season, I reached out to Nikki to forge a connection, and I'm so thrilled to finally be featuring her voice on the pod. Keep in mind, the conversation you're about to hear, it's just the beginning. Nikki and I already have plans to record a very timely election year follow-up to this episode that we're both super eager to share with you. Stay tuned to the end to hear more. Now let's welcome Nikki G. I'm so glad we're here together again. I had such a nice time chatting with you. Was it a week or two ago? We just had such a lovely talk, and I've been really looking forward to this.
Me too.
So you've been really busy this month. It's January, which is a big month for you. So tell us what you've been up to.
Well, for the listeners out there, January is considered Spiritual Abuse Awareness Month. It's also, ironically, Human Trafficking Month. And sometimes there's an intersectionality with that. But I have been helping to highlight survivors during this month. And I like to encourage people who have, social media platforms to just kind of let's amplify what survivors have gone through with spiritual abuse and just the needs that they have navigating all of that. So I kind of say, okay, January's coming. I know it's the beginning of the year and everybody gets excited and they have their to-do list, but my to-do list is usually being very busy.
Yeah, raising awareness. I love the work that you do. And I would love for you to just introduce yourself to the listeners and tell us a little bit about your work and what you're doing specifically, raising awareness around spiritual and religious abuse.
I'm Nikki G. I'm a certified trauma recovery coach, and I love to support survivors who have been through narcissistic abuse, religious trauma, and cult involvement. I support survivors through one-on-one coaching and, resources from my social media accounts to psychoeducation to speaking engagements. I try to support survivors because I remember when I was walking to what I call this long hallway of loneliness, confusion. I did not understand what was going on, what I had been through. And I don't think that's something I'll ever forget. So, my heart is, to be able to support survivors because it is a very insidious abuse, spiritual abuse. And, it is important to empower survivors, to remind them that though a lot of this trauma and a lot of this abuse might have separated them from themselves, they may feel separated from others, they may even feel separated from God, their creator. But recovery looks like being able to establish and reconnect some of those connections. And so coming back home to self is one of the signature things that I like to help walk survivors through. Because once you can come back here and be okay in your body, the recovery journey just, it gets a little easier. So that's a little bit what I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what a beautiful summary. And I feel like your description of what that hallway folks are walking, it makes so much sense why, this January sense of community and connection, why it's so important to you. Like I can hear that. So you want to speak a little bit to the loss of connection and why it's so important that we find community in new ways.
For those who have experienced spiritual abuse, religious trauma, we can talk about the terminology later, but the loneliness, the level of loneliness is so paramount. I mean, I believe any abuse survivor can feel that. But for many, the church, the mosque, the spiritual community, it was their whole lifeline. And so to be disconnected from that, and oftentimes not by choice. Many leave because they don't feel safe in their bodies, because the environment is no longer safe, because there are too many instances of surmounting abuse that they cannot remain. And so they feel ostracized, they feel alone. They even feel alone sometimes with their own loved ones. It could be their spouse, it can be, their family of origin, it could be their best friends. They may love them, but they may not know how to love them after experience such horrific abuse. So the level of loneliness is very high for survivors when they exit these communities. And so during Spiritual Abuse Awareness Month, I try to highlight this part of the population to let them know you're not alone. We see you, we hear you, right? And even recent times, there's so many different organizations, churches, that are in the news. And a lot of people right now are experiencing a lot of religious trauma or spiritual trauma because they are finding out in a lot of the spaces that they congregated in worship or connected spiritually that it wasn't what they thought it was. And just the reality of this congregation, this leader, this community was not what I thought it was can bring a lot of terror and shock to the system. And so, these are so many reasons why I like to highlight and not just extend resources during this month, but I like to describe what it's like for a spiritual abuse survivor when they leave. It is not pretty, but, I will continue to do this as long as, this is the work that I feel called to do in this season. And so, yeah.
Well, thank goodness. It's so important. And, speaking of that, just for the listeners out there, I met you, quote unquote, met you on Instagram.
It's okay. I get it.
We connected on Instagram. So I was following your work and just admiring what you did. And then I tuned into your podcast, which I really want to recommend to listeners, Surviving the Black Church. And I just immediately just felt compelled to reach out to you. It was after I listened to an episode that I reached out to you directly. And I just really appreciate the work that you and your colleagues are doing on that podcast. Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about that podcast and, how it came to be and what it is?
So let me, I guess, backtrack a little bit so I can tell you how we started the podcast. I originated from a religious narcissistic family system. So I grew up in this environment where, my own perspectives and my connection with my own reality was distorted. I was taught and almost kind of groomed to rely on authority figures' perspective and their reality. I mean, as a young child, that's a normal thing that happens in the beginning. You're 5 years old, you don't really know what reality is per se. So you do rely on your family and your caregivers and your parents. However, as you get older and, religious teachings and different things are implemented, after a while, you start realizing, my views, my perspectives are not welcome. What I am perceiving is deemed as being too sensitive, or it's too much, or
Mhm.
you're perceiving this wrong, or maybe it's a wound you have. And so I grew up in this environment where I learned that my needs and my perspective and what reality was to me was not sufficient. So I stuffed and I stuffed and I suppressed. And I learned that Nikki wasn't enough. Plus, in a narcissistic family system, roles are energetically given out, whether you want them or not. And so the
Mhm.
role that I had, unfortunately, was the scapegoat. And that role is where a lot of the issues in the family, the wounds, the trauma, this dysfunction, and the pain of carrying that is put on the scapegoat to carry, because usually the scapegoat, they're the empathic ones. They feel, they may see, but they're blamed for everything. And
Mhm.
so I didn't know this. I wasn't conscious of this when this was happening. But I'm speaking of this because this programmed and indoctrinated me to start to feel like this was normal. So as I moved into adolescence and moved into adulthood, I found myself connected to a lot of narcissistic relationships. And because it was a religious narcissistic family system, by the age of 19, I had given my life to Christ. I made the religion of my family mine. And I was excited. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And then I found myself in my first cult, probably around the age of 20. And it was filled with young people. A lot of them love to pray, they love to worship. The leader, the pastor, she called herself an apostle. It was a she, and her husband was the one who directed the worship. And, I thought this was the best place for me to be. I'm home around my peers. We're on fire for God. And I did not realize it until later on that it was a cult. This set me on a course to cult hop, which is a term in the cult world where you are constantly going in and out of different cults. Sometimes you repeat the same cult because you feel like you cannot exist outside of that cult. And I wasn't aware that I was doing this because I was taught that outside of the cult is demonic. The devil's out
Mhm.
there. You won't make it. You need to be inside this community. And if not this community, some house of worship, some place where God is mentioned so you can be sustained. And so I continued to spiral and found myself in 5 different cults over the course of my life.
What would you say the time period was that you were hopping
Uh,
from age of 19 till
Yeah, till my late 30s, maybe mid
okay.
30s. I don't remember the time frame.
Yeah.
I know the last cult that I was in, I left in 2015, the end of 2015. So I have not been in a cult since then. Like, oh,
Fingers
but
crossed,
I
everybody.
know, I know, because you know what? There is such a stereotype when it comes to cults that people think like, oh, well, you have to be unlearned. You have to be really a lot of trauma, a lot of wounds. But anybody can become a part of a cult. I mean, we look at this country now, I'm not going to get political, but anybody can be swept
That's
into a
right.
cult. And people don't just join cults. You believe this mirage that's presented to you. And
Mhm.
sometimes our internal needs that we may not be aware of, that oftentimes were not met in childhood, we look for these communities to meet those needs. I wasn't aware that I was going into these communities looking to belong, looking for love, looking for guidance, looking to have a stronger relationship with God or higher power. And somebody may say, Nikki, what's wrong with that? There's normalcy to that. But what happens is you gravitate to these communities that pervert those basic needs, that pervert those normal longings that a human person has. And I wasn't aware of myself and my needs. And so it kept repeating until I said, wait a minute, we got to do something about that. We can talk about
Mhm.
that later.
So the cults that you were involved in, were they all religious or spiritual in nature, or were there different varieties?
They were different to some degree. The first cult I was in was predominantly Black cult, and I think they would fall under the non-denominational. This is the terminology they use, but the leader was considered what she said, an apostle. And there was a lot of gifts of the Spirit, demonstration of the gifts of the Spirit, a lot of the prophetic language, a lot of the apostolic language was used, tongues, laying on hands, deliverance, demonstrative worship, praying for Israel and all this stuff like that. Some political streams flew in there too, but that was how the first cult was wired. And then the second one was when I moved to Kansas City, Missouri, and became a part of the International House of Prayer in Kansas City. So that's probably
which
a
is
whole nother episode.
whole other episode.
Yes.
Yes.
But to kind of go back to your original question,
Mhm.
so after I left my last cult, I just kind of shut down and I just said, Nikki, we got to figure this out. Why does this keep happening? Yes, the reality is there was a lot of abuse. There was a lot of manipulation, all that stuff. That's true, but why do you keep repeating this? What am I not seeing? And so I kind of went down a hallway, if you will. I don't know this hallway thing today, but I went
like
down
hallway.
I went down this hallway of learning me, right?
Mhm.
And being in a place where I said, I'm going to be strong in the sense of I'm going to peer into how I got here. I'm going to read the literature. I'm going to listen to the videos. I'm going to go to therapy. And I'm going to face parts of myself that I probably was running from when I
Yeah.
ran to these communities. And when I said I was going to be strong, I really mean that because for a lot of survivors, it's hard to get to that place because many often feel if I start to see what's going on within, then that dismisses what the abusive leader did to me. No, it doesn't. It can be both, right?
Yeah.
It's not our fault, but I think it's important for us to see how we got here so we can stop the cycle. So I'm not in a sixth cult. You know what I mean? So I had to be strong and face some things about me and actually pull on that thread that's sometimes hidden under the sand that goes all the way back to childhood. Like what I'm talking to you about now, I didn't know that then. But in time, I didn't do it all immediately, but over time, as I got strong enough to face parts of myself with help, with a therapist, not just reading information, but with a therapist, I was able to see that connection. But I still wasn't trying to share my story or even do the work I'm doing now. But 2020, COVID happened. An app called a Clubhouse was originated, and I got on the app and I started going into different, and for those who don't know, it's a social media app, but it's an audio app only. So you go in and there's a series of different topics that are created with different houses or clubs. And, if you like Marvel movies, you can go into that club. If you like, Led Zeppelin, you can go into that club. If you want to go into the Prayer and Prophecy Club, you can go into that club. And so I found myself going into various clubs, but I would frequent ones that were talking about narcissism and the narcissistic family system. And then I started sharing about my religious cult experiences. And one thing led to another. And I was like, I think I should be doing this a little bit more. And I kind of had a little prodding, but I started a club. And for like 2.5 years, I educated survivors. People came up on the stage. People were sharing their hearts. The club is still on Clubhouse if anybody wants to go and listen to old rooms. I have ceased to do them now, but they're still archived. But that is where I met my colleagues for the podcast we started last year called Surviving the Black Church. And we got together. We noticed a lot of people in the Black community were coming up on stage and they were sharing their stories and said, I have not found any place where I could do this. Where have you been? We've had older people that have come on that platform in the Black community and said, I wish my grandmother could hear you all sharing your stories and being such a safe place. I mean, I even remember someone that was a part of the Jim Jones cult. She was a child when it happened, and somehow or another, her and a group of kids were not on the base when it occurred. Somehow
Wow.
they got away and they came back and realized what happened, but she's well into her maybe 50s or 60s. She sounds so strong. She came up and spoke to us several times. That was
Powerful.
such an honor. So we realized we want to move this beyond that platform. And we decided to start a podcast that speaks to Black religious trauma or spiritual abuse survivors. Now, we named it that, not to shut down the institution, not to bash the institution, but to highlight, hey, there are some people that are surviving because of the abuse that they've experienced in the Black church. And so, we're hopefully we should get into our second season in the springtime.
Yeah. Yeah. I look forward to it. Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk about some of what you speak to on the podcast in terms of supporting folks who've been marginalized and how they experience spiritual and religious trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and the way intersectionality plays into all that. Before we go there, though, I would love for you to help us define those terms, spiritual and religious trauma and abuse. Do you differentiate between the two, or do you want to speak to that?
Well, the thing is, it's a new area that is being pioneered out. So I don't, from my knowledge at least, I don't know that there's one therapist, one mental health professional, one organization that have distinctly defined it and everybody goes by that. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
So it's very nuanced. There's a lot of interchangeableness about the terminology, right? So spiritual abuse, what is it? And there's several definitions for that too. Many people define it in different ways, but at the end of the day, the components should have the power and control dynamic, right? So it's the manipulation, the exploitation of an individual's faith, their beliefs, their spiritual practices, and it's often by someone in authority, someone that they trust. And the person is in a position of power, and they use that power and they use the religious beliefs and the doctrine to exert power over you.
Mm-hmm.
And so when someone's going through this, fear is instilled by these leaders. You feel a lot of guilt, shame, unwavering compliance. Like, I don't have my own autonomy, my own agency. I have to be at church. I have to go to this program. I have to serve on this committee. And you feel like you don't have choice. So that's kind of like the nuts and bolts of spiritual abuse. But as far as how it's defined and how it's used, okay. So I've heard some people say, when I use the term spiritual abuse, I like to refer to it where it's in the setting of a spiritual area. So yoga community, wellness community, new age community, psychedelics, basically
Mm-hmm.
where they don't have an actual book or a text derived around the religion. You can go to a new age, I don't want to name drop, but there's like a documentary out about a lady named Teal Swan. So I'm not
Oh,
saying this
yeah,
is,
I'm familiar.
yeah, okay.
You can drop
And
that
so,
name. It's been dropped here
okay,
before.
good. Yes, yes. I'm like, okay. But she is what I would, people will refer to that was spiritual abuse. There is not a text. She is the guru. She is the definer of all the education and the awareness that she's pushing out in her community. Whereas religious abuse is more an organized religion. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, they have a text, a staple text, and a lot of abuse takes that text and perverts it and manipulates it and, exerts power over people. So, but some people say, I'm still referring to it as spiritual abuse because the abuse has greatly impacted my human spirit.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
The entirety of who I am has been severely impacted down to the spiritual level. So, yes, it was in a religious environment. Yes, it was in a church. Yes, it was in a mosque, but my spirit was greatly impacted. So, some people use it that way too.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
I'm leaning more on, let's be more intentional about defining the lanes, because either one, religious or spiritual abuse, it is impacting the human spirit. So, but I like the distinction because new age yoga,
Yep.
wellness communities, it's harder to see the abuse because there's no text. There's no, you
That's
have
right.
people that say they've been on the mount, whatever, and they've come down with all of these, ways you can align your chakra and ways you can do this. And they have the ancient mysteries to, and so people just listen to that leader versus, a text. And when you have organized religion, when you have a text, the leader can spiritually or religiously abuse while you are in their presence, while you guys are congregating. And that can continue to be perpetuated while you're home with that text because you've
Sure.
already been indoctrinated to see the text through the leader's eyes. So there are different dynamics about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for being so thorough with that, because I think it's really important distinction for listeners of this podcast and the wellness arena. And something that's very common in those circles is, we're spiritual, not religious. We're spiritual, not religious. And sort of the undercurrent of that is these things, these abusive things that happen in religious spaces can't possibly happen here because we're spiritual, we're not religious. Like it's sort of thrown around in that way. And so to really underscore what spiritual abuse is, and yes, people who experience religious abuse also experience spiritual abuse. And
Right.
you don't have to have religion in place to experience that, I think is just something that's super important for us to highlight and underscore, to validate a lot of the listeners
Yeah.
out there who tune into this podcast who wouldn't consider themselves religious, but have most certainly experienced exactly what you described. So thank you for laying that out so clearly. I think it's super important to normalize both of the
Yes.
terms.
I think that's the word, normalize, and a lot of documentaries, I'm grateful that they are doing ones to show the both and to show what it looks like in a more religious organized setting. And then also a spiritual one. So people can see the difference and feel validated and feel that their experience is being spoken to. So yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, definitely. So, how would you say that marginalized folks experience spiritual and religious abuse differently, given the systemic, I guess, abuses that they live in every day? Like, how does that show up differently, and what are considerations around all that we need to be talking about?
Well, I guess that's where I can introduce, what that looks like, particularly in the Black community, because that's
Yeah.
what I'm speaking to. But there are other minorities that I can't wait till they start sharing their stories, what it looks like in the Hispanic community, what it looks like in the Asian community, because it does look different. And there are similarities to their experience and our experience, but still the same. These experiences need to be spoken to, right? So, within the Black community, there is a lot of root system that we have to unpack before we even can get to what happened in our church, and then before we can even get into what happened in our church, then sometimes you then have to look at what happened in your family of origin. And then you have to backtrack that and look at, what happened to us as a people and our connection. I'm going to talk about Christianity because that's what I'm mostly speaking to. And our connection to Christianity, being enslaved, being brought over to America, being stripped of our cultural experiences, our customs, and then our forms of spirituality. And I'm not saying that everybody that came over did not connect with Christianity. I mean, obviously, I don't know that. I wasn't there, but majority of us had different expressions of spirituality. And all of that was stripped, and we were forced to adopt Christianity as our spiritual source. But we were forced to adopt it under the guise that God, or the Christian God, was okay with us being enslaved, was okay with our oppressors oppressing us. There's even a slave Bible that exists where portions of the Bible were removed in case slaves got their hands on it and was able to read, that they would not be able to see the portions where the God of Christianity freed the Israelites and Moses parted the Red Sea and, He wanted freedom for us, and the scriptures around freedom, a lot of that was removed, and a lot that was kept was scriptures around suffering and being subservient and obeying your masters because they have rule over you.
Right.
That was kept. And so the Bible was used as a weapon and a tool to enslave us and cause us to be subservient, to submit, and to obey. That is how we cut our teeth on Christianity. And so, it is. And then a lot of people and a lot of enslaved during that time, when they started to learn how to read, a lot of them cut their teeth on reading the Bible. So can you imagine, that's in our DNA as a people, that our ancestors learned how to read by learning to read the Bible. It was called the talking book. And many of them would hear their slave masters reading it. They would listen in then. And then some, for those who were able to read, some that came from the north came down to the south. They brought some Bibles and started to try to help the rest of the people, particularly the Southerners, to learn how to read using the scriptures. So they would congregate in the church. The older would teach the younger. They even use worship and worship songs as a form of teaching how to read. They had a style called call and response. So the worship singer or the leader, they would use small phrases, I don't know, like, look what the Lord has done. And the congregants would have to repeat it. Then they would say it again and they would repeat it. And maybe they had it on something where they could see the letters. And this is how they also taught them how to read. So to this day in the Black church, that call and response style is still used within the Black church today. I mean, it's not used to teach people how to read and write, but that was the origins of that. So that connection, and then kind of stepping back, the Black church was a place where my people got resourced and empowered and encouraged to endure slavery and Jim Crow and the Reconstruction era. Many singers, many musicians that now, secular singers and musicians, they cut their teeth being in the Black church, finding out they can sing, finding out they can dance. And many politicians, started in the Black church. So it was almost like a womb that produced so many in so many lanes and spheres in society from the Black church. So you have that connection to the Bible. You have this religion being enforced on us. You have so many people found this as a place of respite and community and connection. Can you imagine for those that have that in their lineage now, 2024, experiencing high levels of religious abuse within the Black church, how hard it is on a DNA level to leave?
Yeah.
And if you leave, there's generational pressure to remain. It doesn't matter. Right. And again, let me preface this with this. This is not every Black church, and I can't speak for every Black church,
of course,
right?
Of course.
But even the reason why we did the podcast is to highlight many people are experiencing verbal abuse within the Black church, where a pastor will be on the pulpit, and if you didn't come to church the Sunday beforehand, he is berating you from the microphone. Sometimes it will get as bad as him asking you to stand up as if he's going to give a prophetic word to you. And this is public in the midst of the service. And so you have that person feeling abused and traumatized. And then you have secondary trauma from people that are witnessing this, and it's instilling fear. And, there are teachings on suffering. Ironically, you would think, not to say that many would stay away from it, but it wouldn't be used as much as it is. Certain doctrines, doctrine of hell, the doctrine of suffering, a lot of these themes are used a lot within the Black church. The unfortunate part is many leaders have learned how to abuse from their oppressor.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so just to come into awareness for a Black religious trauma survivor or Black, spiritual abuse survivor, that this is what they've experienced, it takes a lot of psychoeducation. It takes a lot of awareness because we have been trained that love and abuse go together.
Right. Right.
And it's in our bodies that this is familiar. This is okay. Grandma always used to say, baby, little church hurt don't hurt nobody. So that's been ingrained in me. So if I'm in a service and there's abusive things happening, I am thinking that this is more of hurt. And that is something I wanted to discuss on here, because the terminology that's used within the Black church regarding all this is not spiritual abuse, religious trauma. It's often church hurt is the terminology that's used a lot. I'm grateful that the discussion is happening. So that's a plus, right? But church hurt, you will hear mostly Black people. And I'm not saying it's relegated to just Black people, but we will say church hurt more than anything else. And while the terminology is starting the conversation, it can be a grave disservice to those who are literally being sexually abused, emotionally abused, spiritually abused in these churches.
So when the term church hurt is used, what is meant? Is it a way of sort of waving it away? Like this is just something that is a part of the process?
Yeah.
It's like a gaslighting term.
Yeah. There you go. See, you know what's up. Like initially, I think, and I forget the name of the guy that used the terminology within the Black church. He's a pastor, but initially it was supposed to intend to refer to pain, sometimes inflicted by religious leaders, institutions, and or religious congregants. I'll give you an example. So let's say I'm in the church and I can sing a house down. And the worship leader, I can't though, just FYI, I can't. And the worship leader says to me, hey, Nikki, next Sunday, I want you to lead out on the song we're going to sing. Yeah, okay, great. So I'm all excited. I'm home practicing, everything like that. I get to worship rehearsal Friday night. I walk in and there's somebody else rehearsing early before worship rehearsal starts, and they're singing the song. I'm coming in a little confused, like, okay, I was on time. What's the problem? The leader says nothing to me. He starts the worship practice rehearsal. The other person leads the song. The choir backs him up, and it's over, and everybody just goes home, and he never acknowledges me. He doesn't say anything to me. Now, that may hurt me a little bit. I'm like, whoa,
Sure.
What happened? He didn't even say anything, right? And that may impact me a little bit. And, not to go into, that's another conversation, like the impact of trauma. It's more about not the event, but how somebody responds to it, right? So
right.
I'm assuming that someone will respond to it feeling slighted, feeling a little rejected, but they may have a conversation with the worship leader later, and he may say, you know what, I totally forgot I told you that. I am so sorry. Can you forgive me? Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But there was hurt and pain in that situation. Pain from the worship leader not letting me sing the song. But church hurt is putting everything in the same category. You think about if you go to emergency room. If somebody, God forbid, had got shot with a gun and they had to be rushed to the emergency room versus little old me that got a cut on my finger as I was cutting up tomatoes. I go in, the triage nurse is going to assess what my injuries are, my severity of pain, like where am I on that scale, and who needs to see who first, right? Religious trauma is speaking to perhaps people who have experienced horrendous abuse within the Black church by the hands of a lot of these leaders. The prophetic manipulation, being asked to come to the altar call, and they come and lay hands on you and start saying the most craziest things that you cannot get out of your system 3 years later, right? This is where there is a spectrum. And I think it's a disservice, and it is a form of bypassing. And the reason why I say all this is this. Had I known what I was experiencing in these these cults was not church hurt, but actually abuse, and I was experiencing religious trauma, I would have potentially tried to get some help. But I was taught when you go through things, You just suffer for Christ's sake. He's going to reward you. You roll up your sleeves, you wipe your tears, you put your makeup on, and you go back to church on Sunday. You go back on Wednesday and you shout through it and you pray through it and you fast through it, and you're going to be okay. That's what the church mothers taught me. That's what their grandma and their grandfathers taught them. So this thing of just suffer and endure like a good soldier, when you experience church hurt, you'll be all right. God will make sure your emotions are okay. But a lot of the young folks that's been in a Black church have been coming out and saying, no, ma'am, that's not what we've been dealing with. I am
Good for them.
depressed. I
Yeah.
feel like I don't have my agency anymore. I am dealing with depression, and I go to my mom and she tells me to just put on the whole armor of God. She tells me I have the mind of Christ and I need to just shake off these depressive thoughts, and it's probably a demon. And I hope I'm not,
Wow.
triggering anybody when I say that, but this is the reality for a lot of those in the Black church, that when we try to get help, it is shut down, minimized, and invalidated.
Yeah. It tracks so much, even though it's fascinating hearing these details, because having never been in an organized religion like regularly,
Mm-hmm.
for me, I'm just like seeing these parallels in terms of the spiritual trauma and abuse, and how it's not church hurt in the new age wellness world, but it is never be a victim. So
Mm-hmm.
that's
Okay.
the line that we're fed, is
Seriously.
like, well, you just never be a victim. Like, it's all
Hmm.
about, taking back your personal power, and no one can it make you feel anything, like all of
Right.
that. It's the same mechanism of control. It's just spun
Wow.
in different language, right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
same thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's ignoring that spectrum that you talked about.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, there is a
Yeah.
moment when, maybe I'm not going to take that personally. It's like a
Yeah.
small
Yeah.
thing that
Yeah.
happens. But then that lens gets applied to these extreme situations where a leader is, berating or abusing power. And it's like, well, you're just being a victim. It's a
Right.
similar thing,
It's
right?
a similar thing. And it just invalidates the survivor. It makes you think, and I hate to use this term, but I want to say it for the sake of, I know a lot of survivors probably feel this way or have heard this. It makes you feel like you're crazy, that
Mm-hmm.
you're, are entertaining delusions, that it's you and not them. And we
Yeah,
start to rationalize it. We start to find scriptures or spiritual quotes that we can, just spiritually
that's right.
bypass this to continue to exist in abusive systems. And I think on a societal level, I'm glad we're talking about trauma. I'm glad there's information talking about trauma, but we really need to do more about abuse. Because the trauma, it's the impact, it's how we respond to what
Yeah.
happened to us. But if we can't identify the actual event for what it is, we're going to be stuck in this vortex of, I have these responses, but it's not abuse, but I can't sleep. But it's not abuse, but I'm feeling suicidal ideations. It's not abuse. My church
Uh-huh.
member told me that. The pastor said that. My mom said that. You know, I'm not a
Yeah.
victim, but I'm still going through depressive states. Like, we have to really start to unroll and unpack what abuse is. Because many, whether you
Yes.
Black, green, yellow, Elmo, whatever, I like Elmo. Um, so if you are a human being, 9 times out of 10, either you or someone has experienced some form of abuse. And a lot of times we are unable to really detect it. It's so stealth, it's so cunning. And I think if a lot of survivors knew, wait, I am in an abusive relationship, I'm in an abusive community, I'm in an abusive church or mosque, I need to get out of here. I don't know how I'm going to get out of here, but at least I can call for help. But if I just think it's a nothing burger, it's just something I have to
Yeah.
increase my faith, I have to forgive more, I need to fast more, I need to do more breath work, I need to get into this law of attraction and, not attract this anymore. All this stuff
Hmm.
that excuses that is just straight up abuse.
Yes. Yes. I love so much that you're saying this. It's part of why I framed the series the way that I did. What puts the cult in
Yes.
culture, instead of it being this thing over here. It's like it's built in
Mm-hmm.
It's baked into the cake. It's the water we swim in. All of the analogies apply.
Right.
And this notion, I'm seeing another parallel too with what you're describing in the Black church and the New Age wellness world of it's an inside job.
Right.
It's an inside job. Like the
Right.
solution is always an inside job. And that's what we
Mm-hmm.
have to call, excuse me, bullshit on and
It
say,
is. It is.
no, because there's
Mm-hmm.
these systemic forces, there's these power imbalances, there's these
Mm-hmm.
abuses going on. And I just love so much that you're emphasizing that. I hadn't heard it framed that way, though, just shifting, that helps me a lot, like just shifting the awareness from even in the work that we're doing in the recovery
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
world of like so much focus on the trauma, the trauma, the trauma. And like you said from the
Mm-hmm.
very beginning, like we do have to do our work to
Mm-hmm.
figure out, why we're stepping into these containers over and over again. And also, what are we going to do about the fact that abuse happens, and how are we going to help people to identify it so that they can
Yes.
avoid the trauma that we're experiencing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you think about narcissistic abuse in a family system, that is hard to detect. This is our first form of attachment is our parents and our family and our caregivers. So that is so subtle. Then you think about narcissistic abuse and romantic dynamics. That is hard. And it looks different in different,
That's right.
settings. And so it is very hard to detect all the time. And so again, not diminishing the need to talk about the trauma, but people won't come for help if they don't even realize that they've been abused.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about this before in our conversation. These abuses, particularly the ones you can't see, that don't have marks, right? For a domestic violence survivor, unfortunately, many of them bear marks. They bear scars, right? But for a spiritual abuse, religious abuse survivor, there oftentimes aren't any scars. So there's an assumption that I'm okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
I work in the medical field as well. So that's why I use a lot of medical analogies. But if someone broke their leg and the doctor gave them surgery, said, okay, 6 months for rehab, would people start to invalidate that person because they're going to rehab? What, you see what I'm saying? Like that makes no
Yeah.
sense. Okay, good. I hope you're doing good. We wouldn't cheer them on because we can physically see the condition of their legs. We can physically know that they're going to their appointments. They're getting the therapy. Hopefully they are improving. So there's not often a lack of community all the time around people who are trying to improve their physical situations. But with this, people act like you have spiritual leprosy.
Mm.
That lonely hallway I was talking about earlier,
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning when I was in it, I was very upset at people who I thought were my friends, who I thought, I really had connections with, and they removed themselves. And I'm like, what happened? But I later realized many of them don't have the capacity. I still don't think that's a good excuse, but whatever. Many of them are ignorant to what spiritual abuse or religious abuse is. Okay. Many don't have the capacity to even research to understand it. They still love us, but they don't know how to touch us. And then many of them don't want to come near lest they hear the things we're pondering and the things we're questioning, which will cause them to start to question. And they are not ready to go to that place. And so they have to back up. And they remove their presence, they remove their support, and many survivors find themselves walking through this alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they need the rehab. The rehab is necessary. And, people think, oh, well, that was a year ago. You should be okay. Do you know how much internal injury
Oh,
happens?
God. Yeah.
Do you know how much psychological injury happens? This in itself, woof, to rewire your mind, your thinking, your perspective on how you see yourself, how you see others, how you see the world. It's a whole overhaul. And so that's why I said in the beginning, my heart, to support survivors, because I remember, just because it's been a while, I told myself, we're not going to forget what it was like in that hallway. So, yeah.
Yeah. And to just underscore what you just said, time doesn't heal all wounds. That
Come on.
adage is not
It's not
valid and
true.
is not true. And I say this
Uh-huh.
as someone who in almost 2 years ago, it'll be 2 years in July, really started my process of recovery. And I left, I cold hopped quite a bit, but the space where I experienced the most injury, I had left 16 years prior, Nikki.
Wow.
16 years. Like the sort of dogma that then was carried on through in other spaces. It wasn't just this one organization, but I was drawn into other spaces that were reiterating the same things. But I would say I had divorced the dogma and separated from it probably 10 years before I really went through this recovery process. And I still needed to go through it and take every single step that I'm walking now. And I attempted to just let the time heal all the wounds. But like you're saying, I needed rehab. Like I couldn't just ignore it away. Time definitely made it a little bit easier in terms of the triggers, but it was still operating and owning me. And actually, more than anything else, I love that you speak to agency so much, because more than anything else, it was inhibiting my expression.
Yes. Yes. And, I want to say this as well. Like, I know I use that analogy, they had the surgery and then they go to rehab. But sometimes when we come out of these experiences in these communities, we can't do anything but just rest. Our bodies are so beat up. And rehab may look like the first 6 months, you just sleep. You watch a good show, you find something funny, you go for a walk, you just breathe, you don't look at anything spiritual or religious for a while, like giving survivors permission to just be. And it's their choice, right? That's what I like to do when I coach, when I speak. Here is the buffet. You pick up your plate when you're ready to eat, and you pick up what you feel will be good for you at that moment. Nice. And if that means you rest, you don't educate, for some, all I can do is I just have to sit here and breathe. Yeah. And that is part of recovery. And there are times you have the strength to start reading material and listening to podcasts. And then you say, I need to breathe again.
I need a break. Yeah.
And you go watch Marvel movies or Game of Thrones, or you go to a basketball game, you go to a zoo, you find something natural, you look at the sky and the sun, and you find a way to ground yourself, which is so important in this. So rehab doesn't always mean as soon as you come out, you jump into some people can't jump into therapy right away because it's been demonized. I know in the Black church, it is definitely demonized. There is such a stigma with mental health. So many that come out, they're not initially ready to go to therapy. That is not an initial resource. They would probably fare well with a support group so they can talk. Many survivors, they want to talk. And it's not so much, some want to rage against the machine. And I like, hey, let me give you a microphone. Go ahead.
Bring it.
Get it out. Rage is a beautiful emotion. We got to know how to steward it. I don't feel like that's something to hide and suppress. But, some, they want to talk. Their body wants them to talk, because many have held these stories in their bodies for years. And they found a place where they can share. Even if they love people, it didn't feel safe enough without people possibly ridiculing them, pulling out what I call scripture bombs and scripture guns, where it's like, that happened to you? Let me pull this out. You're supposed to obey those in authority. Let me pull this out. You're supposed to, pray and fast. You're supposed to forgive those who, offend you. All that stuff. And so they don't feel safe around those people. So they just rationalize and say, you know what? It's better to stay in my body. I mean, that's not conscious, but that's what happens. And their body is like, can I come out? Can I get it out?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I want to have the freedom. And so I think survivors want to be heard. They want to be validated. They want to know that when they share, that people to the best of their abilities can say, you know what? I might not have been through that, but my goodness, that sounds like abuse. That sounds like some heavy trauma. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry that happened to you. They
Yeah.
want to be believed. They want to
Yeah.
know that people are not going to accuse them of trying to bring down the man or woman of God or the guru. They
Mm-hmm.
don't want to worry about somebody's going to accuse them of having an agenda to take the whole community down. They want to know that I can share this and I'm going to be believed. I'm going to be supported. I'm going to be strengthened, you know?
Yeah.
So other people may have, a different order, but I feel like let them talk, let them
Yeah.
share, let them cry, let them feel their emotions. Sometimes for the first time in a long time,
Yeah.
let their come into their body and realize this is not the enemy, but this
Mm-hmm.
houses some beautiful things in there. I was taught indirectly that inside of me was, a sinful nature, and it was dirty and it was nasty and it constantly had to be abased and constantly had to be adjusted and it was broken.
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you, getting away from that perspective has been so freeing to me
Yeah.
because now I'm in a place where I'm coming into harmony with the voice of my body. That was a concept I never knew in my family of origin or all that I walked through. And it's still a work in progress, but it's like I shared a part of one of my story from 20 years ago to somebody the other day. And as I was sharing it, I started welling up and I could feel and I said, hold on. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, body, oh my gosh, you've been carrying that still? I didn't know. And I just allowed myself to cry. I couldn't have
Mm.
done this 10 years ago
Yeah.
because I was taught that emotions are bad and we're not supposed to feel anything. But if you were in a church, if you're in a black church, you need to feel angry because the devil is winning. You need to feel angry because the
Mm.
word of the Lord is not spreading. You can't feel joy. You can't feel pleasure. That's the demon stuff. That's the demon area.
Wow.
But now
Hmm.
I want to feel pleasure. I want to feel
Yeah.
joy. I want to feel grief when I need to grieve. I want to feel sadness when it comes up. And so I didn't push it down. I said, you're talking. Thank you. Our body is our enemy. It's our friend.
Yeah. That's
Friend.
right.
And it sends us messages to help us heal. Not just the medicine, not just the surgeries. It wants to speak to us, but many of us, like a radio, we have it turned off. The signal is always going out,
Yeah.
but we have it turned off. And so recovery, even for me, looked like, wait a minute, there's a signal? I didn't know that. Let me turn it
Mm-hmm.
on. Ooh. Oh, I'm hearing, hey, you put me through a lot of stuff here now. We need to slow down. But, these are some of the things I think survivors need to hear, in addition to this is what abuse looks like, this is what trauma, the
Yeah.
terms, all that stuff. That's
Yeah.
great. But the practical day by day, how do I do this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's where coaches come in, therapists and mental health professionals, they are needed. They diagnose a lot of disorders that people wind up developing, coming out of all of this. And they treat and they diagnose. I do not do that as a coach. I'm your champion in the corner. This is your
Mm-hmm.
book of that now the cult leader doesn't have the pen. Your mama, your daddy doesn't have the pen. That narcissistic relationship doesn't have the pen. You have the pen and you can write your story now yourself. I'm just here to
Beautiful.
cheer you on. That's what I do in my work.
I love it. A lot of the things you laid out really made me think of something that really helped me in my recovery when I learned, I was reading an article. It wasn't even in her book. It was in an article. Alexandra Stein, she
Yes.
used this term, triple isolation, that
Mm-hmm.
cults create triple isolation. And I think it's so important. I just want to presence it here. So isolation from the outside world, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you have
Mm-hmm.
your
Mm-hmm.
contained community, isolation from one another within the group. So
Mm-hmm.
you're not allowed to talk about certain things. There's
There
parameters
you
around how
go.
you need to show up. And then
Mm-hmm.
isolation from self and that inner voice
Yes.
you were just describing. And what's so fascinating, Nikki, I just have to share this because you're talking about this separation from the body. And I just want to presence this for all the people who were in the org with me, which is the alias we use for the organization that a lot of listeners were a part of. And one of the real moral injuries that so many of us faced was that we were in a space where the primary motive of the physical practice was to connect to sensation and get in touch with our bodies. So a lot of us,
Whoa.
yeah. So a lot of us came in, I really want your take on this. A lot of us came in having experienced trauma. Many of us, I'm raising my hand, having
Mm-hmm.
experienced sexual trauma, physical trauma. So having sort of a dissociative history, right? Go into this space and have this miraculous experience
Mm-hmm.
of finding a connection to sensation and feeling our bodies for the first time. And I remember laying on the floor
Whoa.
crying, just like, oh my God, this feels amazing. And of course, I'm
Mm-hmm.
attributing all of it to the practice, not
Mm-hmm.
to the
Mm-hmm.
fact that I'm
Mm-hmm.
in my body. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah, 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 yeah.
this practice is giving this to me. So I'm having this amazing experience. And I know a lot of my friends and colleagues we've talked about, we have this experience, right? So this is happening, this
Mm-hmm.
goodness. And that's deepening. But as you progress through the levels, because of course, Nikki, there's levels.
Yep, of
We had to
course.
go through all the levels. And as you progress, though, it gets a little, in my opinion, now a little more dissociative and disembodied
Mm-hmm.
because it's all about all these
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
ideas and
Mm-hmm.
dogmas. But the core of it is still connecting to sensation. And then you layer on top of that all these ways of behaving. And so there's this inherent conflict going on, which is that I'm supposed to be listening to my body and seeking pleasure and comfort, but I'm also being told that I'm taking things too personally. I'm also being told that I should never be a victim. I'm also being told that my body isn't the right shape or,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
there's these two things running concurrently. And can you talk a little bit about, because I know this happens in other spaces, maybe not specifically around the body piece, but these mixed messages, that sort of disorganized
Yeah.
attachment that happens. Like you said something about the Black church and love and abuse.
Yeah, they go together. That's
Yeah,
what
they
we
go
that's what we
together.
believe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we're not conscious of that, but yeah, it's very hard. It is very dissociative for a lot of us to hold the two together. And again, I wasn't conscious of that. I don't know if you all were conscious when you were in it, not until you
Oh, heck
came
no.
out. You're like, oh,
I mean, I can only speak for myself, but no,
right,
is the
right.
answer.
But it's never all deceptive,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's never all abusive. There has to be something to bait us,
That's
right?
right.
Little bit of truth, a little bit of science, a little bit of, what have you, connecting with your needs that you have when you come into the community, enough to bait you. And then the process starts where it starts to have those concurrent, and that's how they get over. It's not one or the other, it's both. That is where we were told, the gray is wrong and being in the middle is bad. And,
Mm.
ironically, you need to be hot or cold. Well, the Bible talks about that. You either
Mm.
need to be hot or cold. He's going to spit you out your mouth. I mean, well, that's the Black version I was taught. That scripture, that's the way
Uh-huh.
they broke that scripture down, right? So
Okay.
when those things are being taught together, it just really is so abusive and it does damage on all fronts, right? And
Yeah.
so I know that for me, the power of reclaiming what is important to me has been very paramount in my recovery because there were a lot of things about me and what I touched and what touched me or whatever that I lost or it was perverted in the cults I was in. So when I left, it was like I was, bare. My authentic self was shredded. I had this cult personality that I had to, work through and
Yeah.
everything. But as I started to come out of all of that, I had to start asking myself, Nikki, what did they take from you that you want back? What do
Mm-hmm.
you want back? you know
Okay.
Music was one of the first ones, and I,
Yeah.
I don't even remember how it happened, but it just happened. And I remember running into a friend of mine. I'm originally from New Jersey. I went to go visit somebody and I ran into her and I was like, hey, have you heard this song? And I put it on and she just smiled. She's like, Nikki, the old Nikki is coming back. You know how much you love music and how for years you wasn't listening. Because we were so in the cold, we didn't do anything, and so it is more complex when people experience it where the sensations of your body is not like you can change it out. You know what I mean? And it's more than just a decision that I want to reclaim. I mean, it would take someone on a therapeutic space to actually help someone to psychologically start to sift that out.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Because your body is still speaking. That is a natural component. That's physiological. And I get angry that a cult leader would go after that to get people to fulfill their needs and abuse people, because it's not something to say, okay, I like music, I don't like music. This is your body, right?
Yeah.
You know? And so my heart
Yeah.
goes out to you and people who have experienced trauma in that space, because it's your body, but it may take longer to reclaim components of your body, you know, your emotions, your sensations, things of that nature.
Yeah, I think for a lot of folks, what I'm seeing, what I experience personally, and what I'm seeing in terms of a commonality is um, for many of us, and for myself, like my relationship with my body remained intimate. It
Mm-hmm.
was just that there was this whole language of movement
Mm-hmm.
that was connected to the practice. And so I couldn't do certain dance movements. I couldn't listen to certain music for sure. That was
Mm-hmm.
definitely a
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I see a lot of people coming out now that they've been indoctrinated to believe that the movements, which Nikki, they're very basic dance movements that they teach in this practice, and they're in no way proprietary, but they're pitched as though they are. So you have all these people who are like, well, if I leave, I can't do any of these movements.
Mm-hmm.
They don't belong to me.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
belong to the brand.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like this capitalistic problem, but it's this core fundamental psychological crisis
Yeah.
because I've
Yeah.
been through it.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
so rough because it's like a lot of people like me, I had to stop dancing for a few years,
Yeah.
which is tragic because it's one of the greatest joys of my life. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
fortunately doing it again and facilitating again, and all
Yay.
that's great. Yeah.
Yay.
It's so there's
Mm-hmm.
hope and it's very exciting, but it took a long time. It
Yeah.
took a
Yeah.
really long time. Yeah.
Yeah. I can
Yeah.
imagine, because it takes time. That's the other thing I don't think people on the outside are aware of. You know, religious trauma, spiritual abuse, cult involvement. It takes time for survivors to rebuild their lives. They may look like they're not in rehab because they don't have a brace on their knee or a scar on their arm, but many are in rehab. And I don't like to put it like that, like it's so scary. Like, well, if it's going to take all that time, then I don't want to do any of it. And I get you. I get you. But I like to put it to people like this. Don't you want the rest of your life to be yours, though? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Mm,
do you want that back? Don't you want to erase this mark from what we've been through? Like, yes, I talk about these things for my work, but this is not my whole life. You know, you and I were talking about watching some shows before we
oh,
started
yeah.
recording, and I enjoy it. I enjoy watching a dog roll over and get back. Like the simple things
Yeah.
I'm finding bring me joy and pleasure. And I am allowing that to happen organically. But I also have a resolve that they're not going to take my remaining years on this planet away from me. They took so much time when I was in it, you know,
Yeah.
recovering, when I didn't understand it, you know, rehabbing. But I want to experience joy, pleasure, anger, grief, happiness, rage, all of the emotions, because as a human being, that is part of my experience.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a resolve and a resilience in me not to get them back. And I don't even, that's not a problem if people want to, you know, they say the best revenge is living your life successfully. I don't really care about that, but some people do, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But me coming into the freedom that I should have experienced years ago, it's very important to me. And there are layers to that. You know, I often refer to healing that some people look at it like a watch, and they're constantly looking at their watch. I should be over this by now. I should be doing better with
Mm,
this. I should be feeling, connected to my body, or I should, we will beat ourselves up a lot because we expect to be in this place as if we're healed. It doesn't work that way. Healing is an evolution. And because I believe that, then I take that watch off and I throw it away. I'm not putting myself on it. That pressure feels like what I came out of, right?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
hmm That pressure
Absolutely.
feels like I have to be enough. I have to be this. No, I
Yeah.
don't. I can just be. And whether I feel recovered or not, whether I feel I have a laundry list of things I still need to tackle, it's life. And there are different ways that I'm evolving in that. You learn to start identifying what you need in the moment, in the present. That's the other thing. And I was in a lot of cults that were very apocalyptic and end time. So we were constantly in the future. And
Mm,
because of my trauma, what I experienced, I was also in the past. So I was doing this all the time.
right.
I was never here. So that's another thing I'm reclaiming. And, there's normalcy to do that. Like I need to look a couple months ahead to plan. I'm not talking about those type of things,
Sure.
but when I'm constantly living in that and I'm not living here, I try to be aware. I'm not perfect with it, but that's the healing journey for
That's,
me. And it can be
yeah.
beautiful. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be hard all the time.
Right. 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 And that, that perfection is the oppression at work. That's
Yes.
that same force
Mhm.
just pressing on us in a whole different way. It's like that
Mhm.
pendulum ride from like,
Mhm.
are we going to suffer and try and be broken? Or are we going to be perfect? And it's like, no and no. What if we get to be human somewhere in the middle?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Yeah.
that's more attractive than perfectionism.
I
Because
agree.
people that try to climb that perfectionist ladder, they don't realize it, a lot of them, but that comes with an air of piety. And I've evolved and I've arrived and I'm
Girl, I've
up
been
here,
there.
that elite, that elitism of look what I did. I'm
Yeah.
enough. You're not. And
Hmm.
so you can have it. I'm human. I make mistakes. When I realize it, if somebody brings it to my attention, I'm sorry. I hold myself accountable, right? And then I try to course correct and learn and move forward.
Yeah.
But being able to live in my humanity, which was, frowned upon in all of these cults that I was in, it feels good. And living in my humanity, I'm able to connect with a lot of humans that I would have never done if I still had those teachings. Politically, things have changed for me. I've met some of the most beautiful people that
Mm.
did not represent what I thought was right or wrong in those communities I came out of. And I
Yeah.
can't imagine not meeting them and knowing them now because of beliefs. That's a whole
Yeah.
conversation there. What do we do with beliefs? Do we even think, are these mine? Many beliefs we hold on this planet are not ours. We're not aware of them. They're grandmas, they are our husbands, our boyfriends, our wives, our partners, they're our teachers, they're the politicians, there's people on the news station, on the movies we watch. We ingest a lot of ideology, a lot of beliefs, and I don't think we're always aware of where they come from. And sometimes we're not conscious of taking the time to sift through them and say, oh, that's a crazy belief. I don't believe that. But I have to be aware of it to say, that's not mine. Nope, that came
Yeah.
from that. And nope, mm-mm.
Yeah. I would love to leave a little bit of a cliffhanger here
Oh,
because
yes.
for the
Oh, we going.
listeners. Yeah, we're gonna leave a cliffhanger for the listeners because I would love, on just kind of the heels of what you were just saying, I want to have you back for a conversation that I am so looking forward to around what you were just describing in terms of how beliefs are fed to us, the ideologies, how that shapes political landscapes, power
Mm-hmm.
dynamics, and the mess that we're in right now
Mm-hmm.
in this
Mm-hmm.
country, which goes so far back. And of course, we're not going to unpack it all, but you have some really, really interesting things to share when it comes to how these religious abuses shape ideology
Yes.
and behavior and political landscapes, and how the long game
Mm-hmm.
of all of this. Anything you want to say to, lay the foundation for where we're going to go next time we get together?
Well, I will say this. I talked about one of the cults that I came out of was predominantly Black. And then I talked about the next one that I was a part of was the International House of Prayer. Subsequent cults that I was in, and even in International House of Prayer, the political realm was merged into all of this. And so I have ingested a lot. I have been to marches. I have had the red tape on my mouth. I have prayed and fasted for overturning of, and I will not finish that sentence. That's for next time. I have ingested a lot of material during that time, how a lot in these political communities that connect with the religious cult communities, what their strategy is, how we got where we are politically in this nation now. A lot of it is funneled from these cults that I unfortunately have walked through, and they have a certain ideology. They have strategy that you would not believe. And it's been taking place over decades, and most people are unaware. I spoke about this on Clubhouse. I did several rooms, but I haven't been on a podcast talking about it. So I'm really excited to do so, because I think if we can see politically that merge. I mean, I think people with our former president, Donald Trump, can see some things, and how, people said, the right was in bed with Donald Trump. How could they coexist? Oh, there's a lot to talk about how that relationship is. And from the Supreme Court level down to the court level to the states to all these different ideologies that are pushed. And now we as Americans are really feeling like we have no agency.
Yeah.
There is actually a term called spiritual abuse on the state level. And
Ah,
that was coined by Dr. Jamie Merrick, I believe. And I went to a workshop and she talked about it. And I cried because I said, oh my gosh, somebody is speaking to this. To
yes.
be a part of this in cults and be a part of this in abusive communities, and then to leave and seeing the exact things you prayed for, was indoctrinated with, take place on the
Mm,
state level, on the national level, on the news. You feel like you cannot escape it. That is a form of abuse on a different kind of level. So I'm excited to go into
oh my gosh.
conversations with you about, the intersectionality between the religious right, so to speak, and, the cults and the political realm and everything like that. This is not about left or right, y'all. It's just about
Right.
pulling back the curtain and
Yep.
explaining how they think, how they operate, and what's on their agenda from now going forward. So yeah.
That's right. Yeah, because it's not. I mean, these dynamics aren't left or right.
Hmm.
They can be used in any direction, and I'm really honored and thrilled to feature that conversation. I can't wait to have it.
Yes. Excited. Hmm.
Because it's an election year. It's a really just a critical time to be presencing this conversation so that we can all, like you said, peek behind that curtain a little more before we go to the voting booth, so we really understand what we're dealing with.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm so grateful. Yeah. And we'll see you again soon. But just so people know how they can connect with you in the meantime, you have some meetups going on, and
Yep.
tell us the things that we need to know about how to stay connected to Nikki G.
Well, you can first go on my website, nikkigspeaks.com, and
Mhm.
you can find more about my story. You can find resources and one-on-one coaching. So I am available for that. I'm in the process of launching my online membership soon. So it will be for survivors of religious trauma, spiritual abuse, cult involvement, narcissism as well too. I know that sounds like a tall order, but they're all connected in a weird way,
Yeah.
right? And so, I mean, in that space, we're going to have support groups twice a month. We're going to have some skill building in there. There's going to be a resource center, and it's off of social media. So for those that say, I don't like social
Nice.
media, we'll be having some guest speakers in there. We'll be having some coaching programs in there, some workshops. There's a whole lot that will be a part of this online community. But most importantly, it'll be a place where survivors can start to share their stories in a safe space, with other survivors that will be trauma informed, trauma sensitive. So this is not a substitution for therapy. If someone feels like they really need that, I encourage people to do that. But this is something that's supplemental And I am the co-founder of Black Religious Trauma Recovery Network, which was started at the end of last year with my colleague, Jonathan Carrington. And we are looking for that network to continue to grow and be a resource for those who are in the Black community who've experienced religious abuse, spiritual abuse, and find a place where they can share, they can be educated, supported, resourced. We got a whole lot of stuff in the tank that we're going to do. But right now, what we are doing is we are offering twice a month, every second and fourth Thursday, meetup events for free. And it is open to everyone, but it is preferencing Black religious trauma survivors. So we have people that come in that are not Black, and we welcome them, and we have discussions to kind of describe what it's like to go through this form of abuse in the Black community. So we have therapists, we have mental health professionals, we have coaches that want to learn how they can service their clients. So we do that twice a month on Thursdays. And second season of the podcast of Surviving Black Church hopefully will be in the spring. We're changing the format a little bit. So it will be more conversation driven. It will be with guests and everything like that. And then also on the board of directors for an organization called Tears of Eden, which I love. I've been on the board for 2 years, and Catherine Spearing is the founder, and she started this work 3 years ago, and it is for those who've been spiritually abused in the evangelical community. And we host support groups, sometimes 2 to 3 times a year. So I help facilitate that. So we have that as a resource, and also the podcast for Tears of Eden, which is called Uncertain Podcast. Catherine runs that, and they can find out more information about topics around spiritual abuse, and lots of guests have been on that podcast. So I enjoy doing that as well. And I think that kind of summarizes most of the work that I'm doing for now. Mm-hmm.
You are busy, and I'm so grateful that you are working to provide these resources for folks that are so critically needed. And you are just a wealth of knowledge, and just a total delight. And we will link to everything that you just mentioned in the show notes. So if you're listening, you'll be able to find Nikki that way. So until next time, cliffhanger. Thank you so much for being here, Nikki.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
Good stuff, right? Nikki G will be back, likely sometime in March, when she and I will be diving headfirst into that doozy of a topic. If you'd like to connect with her in the meantime, please visit the show notes for links to Nikki G in all the places. I'm taking another couple of weeks off to work behind the scenes on production, but in mid-February, I will be returning here on the main feed with another guest and a cautionary tale that is sure to hit very close to home with TDP listeners. In the meantime, bonus extras will continue to drop over on Patreon. Later this week, Adi Gorin joins Tracy and I once again, this time for a deconstruction of healing. Healing is a word that's thrown around a lot in wellness spaces. But what is it really? And how, in light of Culture Series content, might we refine our definitions of healing together? Again, that drops on Friday, and then the following week, I'll be sharing another episode in the Subject to Change series, where I'll be speaking off the cuff on a topic that I've been pretty fired up around for a good long while. Let's just call it spiritual capitalism. How and why things very often go sideways in our attempts to turn meaning into money. All of that and more over at patreon.com/The Deeper Pulse. A 7-day free trial is available. Okay, lots to look forward to, folks. I'm going to get to work behind the scenes, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.